Welcome back to the Even Your Dynasty show. On today's video, I want to talk about something that's been kind of going around on social media for the last, I don't know, several weeks, maybe a month, where there's a lot of people that feel like, look, talking about the Giants this offseason, they've been saying things like, "Oh, they're not any better than last season. They're actually worse than last season." A lot of people I see predicting 65, 70, 75 wins, maybe. Which I mean, yeah, anything's possible. But I kind of want to talk about like whether or not the Giants have actually improved since last season, and kind of what's reasonable an expectation of wins for this team going into next year. And I'm of the opinion, I don't know how anybody can look at the opening day roster from the Giants last season and say this team is worse than they were in 2023. And I understand, obviously, the roster changed as the season went on. I do think it's a valid question if the question is really, is this team better than they were in September? I think that's a fair question. But, for the 5 months or 6 months prior to that, it's a big long season. It's a 162 game season. So I think for me, if you want to take an actual measurement on if this team is better than they were in 2024, you just have to look at it from the point of view of, do we think this team's going to win more than 80 games? And, I look at last season's roster and I'm going to pull up the opening day roster. And obviously it changed, like I said. But the reality is on opening day, they really had four starters because Blake Snell was not ready. And we're gonna get into like their overall team from we'll call it April through mid July when Snell finally became available. He made his first like valuable start for the Giants, I think on July 9th. So it took a while. So there's kind of the before Blake Snell and then there's the after Blake Snell. The the Giants rotation consisted of basically Webb, Harrison, Hicks, um, Keaton Wynn, and then obviously Joey Bart got optioned a few days into the season, and they started Dalton Jeffries for several games. That was their starting rotation. I would say we're a little better off right now than we were in 2023. And actually, I would tweak that. I'd say we're a lot better off than we were in 2024 at the beginning of the season. Catchers, we'll see. Murphy may or may not be back. You guys know how I feel there. The bullpen as a whole, I think we feel better about their pen going into next season, given the emergence of Walker as a really dominant closer. Eric Miller looked really good at the end of the year. A lot of other guys that have been pretty reliable arms with like the Rogers twins. Doval's a bounce back candidate, and some pretty explosive arms with a lot of potential still in the pen right now. Guys like Tristan Beck should be back, hopefully for the full year. You had guys like Randy Rodriguez show a lot of good things, and there's a lot more intriguing arms kind of there as options. But then you look at the position player group. Yeah, sure, Chapman maybe is a possible regression candidate. Doesn't mean he's going to regress into being a bad player. Just he probably won't post a 7 WAR again. But he might be a little bit of a regression candidate. But look at the middle infield. The Giants last season started Nick Ahmed and Tyro Estrada for most of the year. Or, well, Ahmed was part of the year. Tyro was most of the year. And then they ended up moving on kind of towards the end. But those two started significant games. Regardless of if Fitzgerald regresses some, I'd say he's an upgrade over what Tyro gave you. And Willie Adames is a massive upgrade over what Nick Ahmed was. So you already have a huge upgrade there. First base, we'll see. Even if they roll with what they had last year, I do believe there is reason to believe Flores will be at least a little better than he was last season. He was borderline unplayable at times. Jorge Soler had a really rough go. Austin Slater did absolutely zero for the Giants last season. Jung-Hoo Lee, hopefully you're getting a full season out of him. Yaz, I don't really want him starting in right field, but at the end of the year, he'll probably put up his numbers and hit 230 to 240 and knock 15 plus out and play good defense in right. But, the main differences I'm seeing with last year's early season roster and this season's is you're basically replacing Conforto with Ramos, Fitzgerald, Estrada with Fitzgerald, Adames or Ahmed with Adames. And then in your rotation, you're taking Keaton Wynn out and putting Justin Verlander or Keaton Wynn and Snell out, who Snell did zero. He was a net negative until July. July 9th. That was the start of his run where he went and was excellent through the back half of the season. But he was a net negative, and I think a lot of people forget that. So you're not really replacing massive production from Snell. You got great half season production from Snell. You did not get great full season production, which is part of why I always argued that Corbin Burns does more for you in the regular season than Snell would have. Granted, they got neither, so it doesn't really matter. But if you get a healthy season out of Verlander, he actually very well, I could see produce similar impact on the regular season for the Giants. In a one game, they made it to a playoff or anything like that. Of course, I'd rather have Snell. I think that's obvious. But you look at this roster, and this roster right here found a way to win 80 games, and that is while they absolutely punted games in the early part of the season. This is a lineup that they actually trotted out last season. You had Soler hitting third, Conforto fourth, and then you also had Estrada, Yaz, Murphy, and Ahmed as the last four hitters in your lineup. They with Keaton Wynn pitching, it's no wonder in this game they got shut out. Like, they were punting games early. They started Dalton Jeffries against the Padres. They started him again against Boston, and I think he came in out of the pen, but he got rocked. Like, they were punting games early in the year. Here's one with Jeffries pitching. It's like what we were saying last season. There were stretches where they were just straight up giving away 4 outs at the bottom of their lineup. And you can't afford to win games doing that, especially because they were giving away 4 outs at the bottom of their lineup. And then they had Soler, who was hitting, at the time of this one, he was hitting 211. So, which, we all saw Soler, his average kind of floated around the Mendoza line for most of the season and had minimal impact. So I don't know how we can watch, what they did and how much better the lineup looks than it, versus what it was, especially early in the season last year, and feel like this team is worse. Now, granted, if we want to make the argument that they're worse than they were in September, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. I think that's a little safer. That one makes sense, as well as if you're trying to make the argument that they're not a playoff team, of course. And as I've said in the past, if you're not a playoff team, then it kind of doesn't matter if you win 75 games or 85 games. You just weren't good enough anyway. At that point, I'd rather focus on development. But, I look at this and I still think, looking at their lineup today, I understand kind of the discourse. And I think that's actually kind of why a lot of people are out talking about them like they're a 70-win team or 65-win team now. I think there's just a lot of discourse with the team not doing as much as people wish they did. And so they just are going to say like, oh, well, they're terrible, and they're going to stay terrible because they didn't get as many players that I want, which, I think that's fair to feel that way, certainly, but it's not. I don't look at this team and think they're going to win 70 games. I look at this team, and if I put an over under on them, I'd probably put it around 82 and a half, 83. I think they're a couple games better than last season. Even if they're just slightly better coached, which I get it. They still have Melvin. They didn't change their coaching staff a whole ton. JP Martinez is now the pitching coach over Brian Price. Brian Price left. They revamped a little bit of the hitting coach situation with David Miner in place, and they brought in one more. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but Vili and Guerrero are gone. But, the big thing was they were really poor situationally. I think that's where having guys like Posey and Wynn that are going to emphasize different things, especially for development and what they want to prioritize and how the team plays. I do believe even with Melvin still there and all these things, they'll play a little bit of a cleaner brand of baseball, which that alone would have accounted for multiple wins last season. They were so terrible about running into extra outs. They were terrible situational hitting. Their pitch sequencing, I complained about it various times, but that remains to be seen if that improves now that Price is gone. Maybe JP Martinez kind of went to the school of Andrew Bailey. Maybe he's an improvement there. But all told, just objectively speaking, looking at this roster, I think they're at least like an 83-win team, really looking at them. Now, there's still time to add. Obviously, today, Anthony Santander went to Toronto for $92.5 million or something like that, which I will say initial reaction, pretty disappointed that the Giants didn't feel like they could do that. I feel like 18.5 million a year is something they easily could have afforded. And he would have given you both, a fallback option for the outfield if some of these kids don't develop, but he also can DH. And he would have given them much needed power from the left side. I mean, he switch hit, but 75% of pitchers are right-handed, so he would have been from the left most of the time. He could have helped there, but the Giants didn't, and it sounds like they never really showed interest. But supposedly they're still kind of sitting around lurking on the Pete Alonso market. We'll see. Maybe they do that. If they do that, I think they jump up into the 86, 87 win range is where I'd feel like they'd fall. 10 games over 500. That seems like pretty reasonable with that roster. Maybe they're not a playoff team at that point, but they could. I think they would have closed the gap on several teams. There's a lot of teams out there that didn't really do a ton to add, that were either in the playoffs or in the playoff hunt last season. Atlanta really hasn't added much. They've lost Freed. Strider's going to be, we'll see how reliable he'll be next season. They are getting Acuna back, so they're probably going to be pretty good still. But they kind of took a step back last season. We'll see. I mean, the Mets, obviously, they're probably going to be pretty good. Phillies haven't really added a ton either. San Diego hasn't spent $1 this offseason. They've done nothing to improve their team. They've probably even gotten worse in all reality. Now, they are looking to trade a few guys. There's talk about them trading Cease. There's talk about them trading Arias. They could take a step back. They just lost one of their pen arms to the Dodgers with Scott going to LA. I mean, LA's added. They're all better than they were last season, but the Diamondbacks got better. I look around the game and there's several teams that didn't really improve their roster. So the Giants could close the gap a little, but they still wouldn't be a favorite to make the playoffs. But, the main purpose of this video is just to address the kind of the elephant in the room where I'm seeing people talk about this team like there's some terrible, putrid White Sox level franchise. And I don't think that's fair or accurate. Just being objective looking at them, I do believe they are better than they were last season. But, how much better, that remains to be seen. Now, I will say, with a lot of young players, we can't just, I think it's fair to think that they're and project improvement and continued development, but it is also entirely possible that they regress. Just like, go through second year slumps, whatever, the league adjusts to them. Ramos could regress, Fitzgerald, some of the pitching, it is fair to think that some of these guys could regress. Just like it's not necessarily safe to assume that Jung-Hoo Lee is going to improve from what he was last season. We hope he does. I think it's more likely that a guy like Lee improves than he does regresses, but we can't just assume it's going to happen. So, of course, if everyone regresses, yeah, this might be like a 75 win team. If Verlander's hurt and everyone regresses a little bit, and of course it could. But there's also, on the flip side of that coin, they could also see decent development out of those guys. It would not shock me if either a Harrison or a Birdsong, one of those guys, takes a big step next season, or if Ramos just kind of does what he does over the full season, or if Lee's a little better, Bailey improves his hitting a tiny bit. All these like little things that could happen. Fitzgerald cleans up a little bit of his game, becomes a 20-30 guy. There's a lot of development that could take place where this team suddenly looks even better than we're projecting now. I mean, if a lot of these guys, young guys, improve, I would easily say this is probably an 85+ win team, even without adding anyone else. So we'll see. At the end of the day, that wouldn't be enough to make the playoffs. But I think it is obvious that this team is, to me, better than they were, at least entering last season. So I want to hear what you guys have to say. Drop a comment in there. Please, if you do enjoy the content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. As we've said in the last couple live shows, when we hit 1,500 subscribers, we are going to do a giveaway. The only thing I can tell you guys is it's a Patrick Bailey item. I don't know specifically what it is. It's if you want to bug Ricky, you can, but I don't think he's going to spoil it until we get close or clear 1,500. So when we do, we will do that giveaway on that live show, whatever the next live show is after we hit 1,500. I think we're about 80 away currently. And, You guys are awesome. I get great support. Like 60% of the people though that watch aren't subscribed. So if you're not, if you can hit that button, appreciate it. Also, do follow me. The X, that's the one where you're going to be able to interact with me the most on, is going to be on X. But we are also on Instagram, TikTok. We try and post shorts there, um, usually more from the live show. So go ahead and drop a follow there if you're interested. Other than that, go Giants. Hope you guys all have a great week, and we'll talk to you later this week.